Have you ever walked slowly across a room while a baby tracked your every movement with their eyes, not turning their head, not reaching, not making a sound, just following you with that steady, unblinking, almost unsettling gaze that feels less like casual observation and more like surveillance, as if this tiny person is monitoring your position in space with a precision and a dedication that makes you feel slightly absurdly that you are being watched by someone who knows something important about why your location matters. And have you ever stopped in the middle of the room and felt the weight of that gaze and wondered what is actually happening inside the baby's mind in that moment? What they are tracking, what they are computing, what the act of following you with their eyes is doing for a brain that is still, by every outward measure, just beginning to understand that a world exists outside of its own sensory experience. That behavior, the baby's quiet, continuous, almost devotional tracking of a person moving through space, is one of the most deceptively profound things that happens in the first months of human life, and the science of what is actually going on when a baby follows you with their eyes is so layered and so surprising and so consequential for everything that comes after it, that by the time this story is finished, what looked like a sweet and simple behavior will have revealed itself as one of the most sophisticated cognitive operations the human brain is capable of. An operation that connects visual tracking to social understanding, to the development of language, to the very foundations of how any human mind ever comes to know that other people have thoughts, and that the world seen through someone else's eyes is a world worth looking at. The story of eye following in babies begins not with gaze tracking, but with eyes themselves, specifically with a biological fact about human eyes that is so obvious most people have stopped noticing it, and yet is, according to evolutionary biologists and developmental scientists, one of the most significant anatomical features of the entire human body. Human beings are the only primates whose eyes have a large, clearly visible white sclera surrounding the colored iris, making the direction of our gaze readable from a distance and at a glance with a precision that no other animal's eye allows. And this is not an accident or a byproduct of some other evolutionary development. It is believed to be a specific and deliberate adaptation selected for over hundreds of thousands of years because a species that communicates through gaze direction, a species that uses the direction of another person's eyes as a primary channel for sharing attention, for coordinating perception, for pointing toward things in the shared environment without using hands or words, needed eyes that broadcast their direction clearly and without ambiguity, eyes that could be read by a group member across a clearing, by a baby from the distance of a feeding mother's arms, by any social partner close enough to look and willing to pay attention. You have white eyes because your ancestors needed their gaze to be followed, and your babies follow your gaze because their brains were built in a world where knowing where the most important person in the environment was looking was one of the most valuable pieces of information available, a piece of information so reliably useful that the ability to extract and act on it was encoded into the developmental program of every human brain born since. The actual emergence of gaze-following behavior in babies happens in a developmental arc that is both precisely timed and deeply illuminating about the cognitive processes it depends on. In the first weeks of life, a baby's eye tracking is largely reflexive, driven by the same basic visual attention systems that orient toward movement and contrast and face-like configurations. A baby will track a slowly moving object or face across their visual field, but this tracking is not yet about where the object is going in any purposeful sense. It is about maintaining visual contact with something that has been detected as important, holding the interesting thing in the center of the visual field where processing is sharpest. By around 3 months, something more intentional begins to emerge. Babies start to show a basic version of gaze following, turning their eyes and then their head in the same direction as a caregiver's gaze shift, not just tracking the caregiver's face, but following the vector of the caregiver's attention into the environment beyond them. And this is the moment when eye following stops being purely visual tracking and starts being something much richer, because following a gaze is not the same cognitive operation as tracking a moving object. Following a gaze requires the baby to understand that the eyes are not just features of the face, but are windows into attention, that where the eyes point is where the mind is directed, that the direction of another person's gaze carries information not just about where they are looking, but about what they are thinking about. And making that leap, understanding eyes as pointing devices for minds rather than just features of faces, is one of the most important cognitive transitions in all of early development. Now here is the first twist that changes everything about how you understand eye following, and it comes from a discovery that researchers in the field of comparative cognition have described as one of the clearest windows into what makes the human mind unique among all animal minds. When researchers tested the gaze-following behavior of human babies, great apes, and other primates, they found that all of these species will follow a gaze to the left or the right when the head turns in that direction. But human babies, and only human babies, will follow an upward gaze, tilting their own head back to look at the ceiling when a person looks up, even when there is no visible target at the top of the visual field, even when there is nothing obviously interesting in the direction being looked at. And the great apes, who are our closest relatives in the entire animal kingdom, do not do this. They follow head turns, but they do not look up at empty space just because someone else is looking there. Because to do that, you have to believe something that apparently no other primate's brain generates as a default assumption, that if another mind is attending to something, that something is worth attending to even before you know what it is, that another person's gaze is itself a sufficient reason to redirect your own attention regardless of whether the target is visible or known, that other minds are reliable guides to what is important in the world, and that following their attention is a reasonable strategy for navigating reality. This belief, this foundational assumption that other minds are worth following, that attention is a resource shared rather than an individual possession, that where someone else looks is information about the world rather than just information about them, is one of the most distinctively and profoundly human assumptions the brain makes, and it is present in human babies from the first months of life and absent in chimpanzees and gorillas regardless of their age or experience, which tells you that it is not learned, it is not culturally transmitted, it is a feature of the human cognitive architecture specifically. One of the things that makes a human brain, rather than merely a primate brain with more cortex. Here is the second twist, and this one is perhaps the most practically and emotionally significant finding in all of the gaze-following literature: the quality and the frequency of a caregiver's gaze-following behavior toward the baby. The degree to which the caregiver notices where the baby is looking and follows that gaze, looks at what the baby is looking at, and then provides language for the thing they are both now attending to together, is one of the single strongest predictors of the baby's vocabulary size at 18 months and language development across the preschool years, a finding that has been replicated across multiple cultures and multiple socioeconomic contexts and multiple parenting styles, and whose mechanism is now well understood. When a caregiver follows the baby's gaze and names what the baby is looking at, they are doing something called joint attention with language, pairing a word with a concept at the precise moment when the baby's full attentional resources are already deployed toward that concept, which is the ideal condition for word learning because it minimizes the problem of reference uncertainty. The fundamental challenge of learning language, which is figuring out which of the 1,000 things in the environment a given word refers to. By aligning the language with what the baby is already demonstrably thinking about, the baby who looks at the dog and hears the word dog at that moment is not facing the same learning challenge as the baby who hears the word dog while looking at the window, and the caregiver who pays attention to where the baby's gaze goes and follows it is not just being responsive and warm. They are actively accelerating the baby's language acquisition through a mechanism so elegant and so effective that it operates without explicit instruction. Through the simple and daily practice of attending to attention itself, of caring enough about what the baby finds interesting to find it interesting too, of letting the baby's gaze lead the adult's eyes rather than always insisting that the adult's gaze lead the baby's mind. There is a concept in developmental psychology called joint attention, the experience of two people attending to the same thing at the same time, with each aware that the other is attending to it, and it is worth spending a moment with the full weight of what joint attention actually is, because it is both deceptively ordinary and genuinely extraordinary. Because joint attention is not just two people looking at the same thing, it is two minds meeting in a shared object of awareness, two streams of consciousness briefly directed toward the same point in the world, and each aware of that shared direction. And this experience, this tiny but profound miracle of meeting another mind in a common focus, is the foundation of every form of human communication and cooperation and cultural transmission that has ever existed. From the first time a prehistoric human pointed at a mammoth on a cave wall, to every conversation and every lesson and every collaborative act of any kind in the entire history of our species, all of it built on this single primitive but irreplaceable capacity, the ability to share attention, to know that you and another person are both looking at the same thing, and to use that shared looking as the basis for shared understanding. And this capacity, this root of all human communication, begins with a baby following your eyes across a room, begins with the gaze tracking that develops in the first months of life, from simple visual following into the rich, intentional, socially sophisticated joint attention of the 9-month-old who looks where you look and then looks back at your face to check that you are both seeing the same thing, and then looks back at the object and then back at your face again, running the full referential triangle of joint attention. That is, according to researchers like Michael Tomasello, the single most important cognitive achievement of the first year of human life, the watershed moment from which language and culture and everything uniquely human flows. What this all comes down to, when you hold all of it in a single view, is that the baby tracking your movements across the room is doing something that is simultaneously ancient and astonishingly sophisticated. They are running a program that was shaped by millions of years of evolution in a species whose survival depended on the ability to share attention and pool knowledge and build a common understanding of the world, a program so important that it was built into the developmental timeline with the same biological certainty as breathing and feeding. A program whose outputs, language, communication, shared understanding, theory of mind, are the entire foundation of human civilization and human culture, and everything that makes human life distinctively and irreplaceably what it is. The baby following you with their eyes is not simply watching you, they are learning you, learning the direction of your attention and what it means, learning that your mind goes places and that those places are worth going to, learning that there is a world beyond their own immediate sensory experience that is made navigable by the attention of the people who love them, learning that knowledge is not a solitary project but a collaborative one, that the best way to understand what is worth knowing is to follow the gaze of someone who already knows. And in that following, in that quiet, steady, devoted tracking of your movement through space, they are laying the foundations of everything that will ever make them capable of genuinely knowing another person, of learning from another person, of thinking alongside another person, of building with another person the shared world that human beings have always made together. One followed gaze, one moment of joint attention, one small and sacred convergence of two minds on the same point in the universe at a time. Subscribe for more mind secrets.